Well, good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending if there's folks across the world today. My name is Andy Stoiber, and I will be moderating this session on the Climate Action Playbook and Toolkit website. A little background on me, I'm a PhD candidate at UW-Madison in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction, and work as a learning scientist, and have worked across both formal and informal spaces, and love museum work in particular. And have been on this project now, going on almost 2 years as this whole playbook and toolkit has been in the works for these past 2 years. On the next slide, we will get an overview of the panelists joining us today. We have friends from both Madison Children's Museum and as well as those from Chicago Children's and one of our advisors, David Sobel. But to run down that list here, Natalie Bortoli, Nadia Niggli, David Sobel, as you said, Amanda Strobel, and Peter Williams. They'll have more time to introduce themselves as we get into the panelist section. Now we'll start with the introduction.
Sorry.
We'll do an overview. Oh, thank you. No, that's great. We'll do an overview of the playbook. You were great, Amanda. The slides.
Sorry.
Thank you. We'll do an overview of the playbook, an overview of the promising practices, and which is kind of the key part of our toolkit. And that'll take up this front section of our session before getting into a discussion and questions with our panelists, as well as time for your audience questions as well. So at any point, I want you to be reminded that you are encouraged to write questions into the Q&A feature of this Zoom, and we will be getting to those questions at the end of the session. Next slide, great. All right, we can go to the next slide, thank you. That's good. All right, and so for those who are newer to this, some of this is a bit of a review from yesterday and how this project, Caretakers of Wonder, had kind of 4 key goals, and this work is 2 of those goals. It is this one here on creating, publishing, and distributing a developmental framework. And we have called our developmental framework the Climate Action Playbook, and is designed for both children, families, and museum professionals working in this area of sustainability and helping support children in a warming world. And our second goal that ties in with this is the comprehensive toolkit and website. And so that will be launching this fall along with the playbook. It will be caretakersofwonder.org. And on that website, there will be all of these resources, including these promising practices, which is a kind of effort across all of the cohort museums that have been part of Caretakers of Wonder, have each contributed to this toolkit, and we'll get to see more about that later. But these are 2 of the key goals from the project that we're reviewing today in this session. And just to make sure credit is given where it is due, these are the key folks that have been absolutely instrumental in getting this playbook created. It is distributed, the writing and work in this was distributed across all of these players that you've heard from in previous sessions and are seeing today, right? Brenda Baker, Jenny Martin, and Katie were both in yesterday's equity session. David Sobel is here today. Amanda is here in this session and also helping lead this whole charge, and myself. And so the playbook, this is the cover you see here. It is going through its final round of design, final revisions and edits, but it is a large document. It comes in currently, over 70 pages, I believe. And it includes all of these different pieces, though, that it's about the key messages that we need families, caregivers, and museum professionals to know and understand around why this work is important, and what should be done around climate change, why working with children is a key aspect of taking on climate change and for their health. This includes then a lot of actual tangible tips and actions. So it's here, you'll see in a moment how it is broken down, but that each page essentially includes both these messages, actions, and tips and activities. So it's meant to be very knowledgeable and then action oriented. I can go to the next slide. And so understanding why we need a climate action playbook, it is because the work that we see needed to take on climate change and to make sure that we have a healthy, robust society, it requires that we start with children today. And so a lot of this work is not about trying to always have intense discussions with children about climate change. It is instead about doing all the background work required to get kids to feel healthy, empowered, and that they can be part of a solution and they're not feeling overwhelmed in the despair by this global issue. And so you'll see this hope, empathy, and agency piece come up across the playbook and how it is organized. And so the key thing that this playbook really is based on, if you were here yesterday and heard from Jonathan Patz, the message around the politicization of this and why we can kind of elide that by focusing on what's best for the planet is what's best for our children. That the actions we take to combat climate change are the same things that will actually help children be healthier, help humans be healthier. It is not necessarily, right, an environmental pitch that we need to be taking here, but one that is focused on children's health, both for mental and physical health, and that what we do to support children's mental and physical health in turn actually supports the planet's health. So it's a win-win situation, and that is the key in understanding, as we heard previously from Joe Cox in Florida, right, how politics around this can make it tricky. And so keeping our message focused on children's health as the key primary reason that we're doing this work is very important and profound in how we've conceptualized these resources. Next slide. Thank you, Amanda. So to give you a structure overview of this playbook, as I said, it is a large document. It is broken down into two sections. First, there is this museum visitors section, which is resources that are intended to be visitor-facing, with the notion that museums might adopt these resources in different ways, as well as then a section for museum staff. There is certainly some overlap in what some of those messages and activities might be, but that it really is designed for both these different audiences, though there is more in the museum staff section as it covers 4 different key areas of the museums. But the key thing to understand across both museum visitors and the museum staff sections are that information is organized into these 3 key categories: nature and well-being, empathy and resilience, hope and collective action. And each of these pillars kind of represent one of our advisors on this team, and so collectively build the infrastructure we believe children need. We'll get more in depth and you see the examples of each of these categories to understand how they are all different. And then the other key piece is that we've broken down the visitor section and anything with education and programs in the museum staff section along these age groups, understanding that children at these different ages require different developmentally appropriate activities, interventions, and information. And so the next slide. So right, as we said, there's both the museum visitors section, which David Sobel will be giving a brief presentation on those key resources specific to the museum visitors section, as well as then I'll come back and do the museum staff section and review that. Thank you. And just to repeat this message that you saw this morning with Brenda, if you didn't, this diagram really represents the heart of the work, that children overwhelmingly need adults, engaged adults, right? From any kind of learning perspective, we need a more knowledgeable other to help us guide us on our journey. And so caregivers here are the key people, right? Whether that's the children's caregivers that are coming to the museum with them, or the adults that are working as museum staff in the museum, they are the key people that are mediating all of this work with children. And again, these 3 areas that we'll talk more about are the 3 pillars that are supporting adults in getting this work done with children. Next slide. All right, and yes, we've talked about these age groups already, and you can see how it kind of roughly breaks down into these formal categories from preschool and early elementary. And the key thing noting here, right, that again, the way you're going to talk to a child who's age 2 about climate change is going to be different than how you might address it with someone who's even age 7. But then, of course, that's different than children that are 10, 11, 12, and older, outside of that early childhood range. Next slide, thank you. And so to help us conceptualize the structure of this playbook, you'll see how there's this table represents the 9 charts that you'd find in the visitor section and the 9 charts that you will find in the education and program section of the museum professional section. So again, another representation of the way this document is broken down and the kind of level of detail you're going to find information. So if you are working potentially right with a child who's age 5, you could go to this resource, find the appropriate section, and find a message, activity, and tip that aligns with the child's age, the children's age, and potentially that area that you're most interested in working from. Next slide. Thank you. Great. And so here we actually see the example of how the information in the playbook is broken down. These little tables that have both the to think about and the to do make up kind of each chart, each page of the playbook outside of the introduction and some background text. And so here you can see, I'll read this clearly so you understand it, as I'll do a couple times throughout this, so we actually get the substance of this playbook. To think about, engage with your community. Collective action is our greatest hope for addressing climate change. We can be a model for our children by helping them to know and understand the larger community outside of their family. Find out more about your local area and surrounding communities that might need help. Focusing our actions on others sends our children an important message about the interconnectedness of people and other living beings. And then that translates over to these concrete actions in the to-do section, providing opportunities and time for your children to practice sharing. For very young children, the simple serve and return practice is a first step to understanding a world outside of their own needs. Have pretend tea or snack parties where you share pouring, distributing and drinking, or eating of the pretend tea or snack, right? Concrete action. You can encourage toddlers to share toys back and forth with an older sibling, or share a meal, toys, books, tools, or whatever is needed with neighbors as a way to model sharing for your children. So this is really meant to meet families at the wherever they are and at a really low barrier to entry, not necessarily the most advanced or confusing and highfalutin ideas, really basic ideas that everyone can benefit from, and especially for young families and new caregivers. Thank you. And so the next slide, please. And we also include across the playbook what not to do's. In a way, since there is so much information in this playbook, the what not to do's act as one way to get key bits of information without feeling like you had to read all of the information in this playbook, and also act as a way of helping kind of alleviate concerns and confusion and providing one key bit of information that we think, hey, this is a key thing to avoid, think about, reconsider if it as kind of a high level issue. Of course, there's going to be different experiences and interactions with that information. And next slide. Great. Okay. I think we got, yes, onto the museum staff part 2, which I will be covering later in more depth. And here we'll get a quick overview of that information, so you see how it is different than the visitor sections. Next slide. I think. And so just like we have in the visitor section, information is broken down into those 9 charts for the education and programs, so folks that work in that area. But then there's also going to be specific information for these 3 departments: in exhibits, marketing, communications, and facilities and operations. Within those areas, we do not create separate charts across these different age bands, but instead do have information for each of these areas organized by our categories of nature and well-being, empathy and resilience, hope, and collective action. And you'll see examples of those soon. Next slide. Great. And so then David Sobel will be providing an overview and some examples of the visitor information that you'll find in the playbook. Thank you, David. Off to you.
Thanks, Andy. That was great. I am David Sobel. I'm a professor emeritus at Antioch University, New England. I've done a lot of writing on children and nature. And so I've been thrilled to be involved in this project because it's one of the few examples of conscientious, thoughtful developmental appropriateness in terms of curriculum or program design. Go ahead and advance, Amanda. So I'm going to just talk you through some examples. I've taken the 3 to 6 age band and looked at one of the pages for each of them in the 3 sections that Andy's been talking about. And a big component of the nature and well-being section has been our conviction that what we really need to do is help children bond with the natural world so that they can grow up to be adults who want to protect and take action for it. So a lot of what you see in the nature and well-being section will not sound like climate education, but in terms of what we know about children's relationship to nature in childhood and their adult behavior, these are the things that are important. So I'm not going to read these sections, but all the text here, but this idea of playing outdoors develops attitudes of care and concern for the natural world is a big part of what should be happening for ages 3 to 6. And then specific examples, making collections, not being afraid to pick dandelions and make necklaces of them, looking under rocks for bugs and answering children's questions about them. This is what we want to do both indoors and in the museum, creating nature tables in the museum to get kids to engage with natural materials. Next section, the next slide. So here's a great example from a nature preschool program in Alabama, where the kids were on a nature walk and they spontaneously all wanted to collect acorns. And so that became the activity that day. There's a natural tendency in childhood to collect natural materials, so we want to support it. Next slide. So in the empathy and resilience band, what we're thinking about is trying to get children to understand and regulate their emotions and learn how to be calm under stress. And that's a lifelong resiliency skill. My apologies for the background mowing noise if that's coming through. I think it'll move away quickly. And so examples of how you do empathy and resilience, this is both for museum professionals, but for parents, is to get parents to start to encourage breathing exercises and taking time for pause and reflection. We want to provide examples in museums or places in museums where that can happen. Sorry. So the next slide. So here are examples of places for calmness and empathy and reflection. So places where parents can get together with kids and read books. This is a nice snow globe that's a calming activity for kids, a nest. And I think Nadia will talk about some of this later on in terms of the exhibit at the Children's Museum in Madison, where they've created these things. Another great example of developing empathy in children. My wife was recently trying to chase squirrels away from our bird feeder, yelling, bad squirrel, go away." And my 4-year-old granddaughter said afterwards, she said, "Maybe it's a good squirrel." And so it's that kind of empathy with animals and with other people that we're trying to support in the 3 to 6 age period. Next slide. And then hope and collective action. What we know from research about nature engagement and adult environmental behavior is that if you can preserve a sense of hope and provide examples for agency at a very local level, that's going to build into the willingness to take climate action later in life. So emphasizing the importance of a problem-solving mindset and working together to take action. You start to introduce children to the people in the community who are basically service providers and understand that they're doing what they do to help other people. And that means, the things you can do is take public transportation and go to public libraries and not only read stuff online take the elevator instead of walking up steps, or walk up steps and instead of taking the elevator. And so next slide. No, that's not the next slide. Next slide. Oh, there was supposed to be an image there that wasn't there. I guess we lost that. Okay. There was supposed to be a slide that showed examples of hope and collective action images, gardening programs in museums, things where children can help take care of the museum. It's those ways in which you get parents and kids actually doing helping projects that starts to establish this collective action orientation. Okay, I think that's all.
Thank you, David. Excellent. And so you've now seen an example for visitors. These are potentially visitor-facing information that folks can bring home with them, find online at home, and do activities with their children along one of these pillars. And so to now kind of understand the other side of things, we'll dive into the museum professional sections and providing examples from each of the areas as well as each department. So here we have, again, education and programs. We don't have an example for each age in this, but there are going to be both education and programs by birth to 2, 3 to 5, and 6 to 8 within each area. And so I do want to take a moment to let people absorb some of the information that are on each of these slides. As we will be getting in the discussion around this with our panelists, I think it's just helpful for folks to have a actual understanding of the substance of the material. So take a moment to look at this slide, as long as you can see all the information, or I can read it. Great. Amanda, if you want to go to the next slide, I hope that was enough time. But these are pictures that help illustrate what the examples from there, right? A key thing for nature and well-being is really to get kids comfortable with nature, to be stewards of good of nature and of the environment, and getting children to actually interact with natural materials is one of the key kind of aspects of this framework. And so even if folks aren't able to have outdoor space at their organization, that here's a way to bring nature inside in a real way instead of synthetic or artificial materials, really trying to use natural materials as a key way to build this relationship with children. Next slide. And so now we can look at this example. Again, this is within the education and programs section, which is broken down by each age band. And this focus on empathy and resilience for museum professionals is really meant to help children build strong mental health, to have the tools needed to grow up in a warming world where there are unknowns every day in a way, but to understand that to give care to others will be a great way to build kindness for oneself and feel good. Again, take a moment to look at this slide. Great, thanks, Amanda. We can go to the next slide. And this will be the last example of education and programs work, but here we see it represented by the hope and collective action pillar. Again, a different take on the work in building hope and collective action, trying to understand what we can do to build a better world and instill from a young age that, we as humans, anyone has some agency. They have the ability to build a better world, to be part of the change they want to see, and that in making action, taking that action is often the thing that makes you feel best about the situation. I think Jessica Kleckska's work in literature review yesterday kind of resonates with this, that we want to make sure that doing some kind of action is the key to building resilience, to seeing change, to being hopeful, to not succumbing to despair is really the key part of that. Excellent. We'll go to the next slide. Can take time. Next slide. Yeah, sorry. And so, back slide. Sorry about that, Amanda. I didn't realize it switched. And so again, an example, this here we have the exhibits. This is not going to be broken down by age band. And again, it shows hope and collective action, messaging, and tips for exhibit folks in particular. Something to note, of course, is that there's going to be overlap across some of these areas and across some of the departments, but information is meant to be organized so it's most specific. So, right, if you, at your institution, using this resource, you're not telling someone in exhibits to read the whole document, but you're able to give it to them and say, hey, make sure you look at the exhibits information as you work on this, right? Same thing with education and programs, where there's more information since it's across all these age bands, that folks have a resource that is going to be tailored to them instead of feeling like they have to sort through this whole large book essentially to understand what to do. So we can go on to the next slide to show another example from the nature and well-being section, how this shows up again for exhibits people in particular addressing this nature and well-being area. And so you can imagine that if you're looking to create a program and you want to focus on interactions with nature, you would go to nature and well-being, education and programs, and you could find an age. Or if you want to focus on hope and collective action in your exhibit, you can go to that section. Go to the next slide. I just want to, I think, kind of coast through some of these so you get your eyeballs on them and understand the kind of breadth of information before we get into our discussion. Take a moment to look at this. And just to reiterate, empathy and resilience really does align with one of our key advisors, Richie Davidson, whose work in mindfulness, kind of human flourishing and well-being, has shown the importance of just kind of small actions, as Brenda said yesterday, even taking 30 seconds to do something that is mindful, reflective, and helps you tune in, can build really healthy habits and create the resilience that we hope children will have. Next slide, for example, of, yes, some examples kind of the possibilities of these exhibits. We see both an outdoor space and an indoor space here that I think our friends from Chicago can talk about more. So right, we know that every space has different constraints. And so if you don't have outdoor space, we don't want you to feel all is lost. There are still opportunities with indoor spaces. And go to the next slide. That's all right. And so just so you see that how extensive the resource is, we have, again, marketing communications as one of the areas where we have information across nature and well-being. You can go to the next slide. As well as marketing communications information for empathy and resilience. And next slide. As well as marketing and communications information for hope and collective action. And then lastly, I want to get to some of our discussion. So I'm just going to go through these next two slides showing you, here's an example, right, of how communications are being incorporated into a museum by having clear sort of descriptions of how to either recycle, dispose of your trash, or compost, which is a key and small thing that can go a long way in the sustainability work. Great. And lastly, facilities and operations is the last area or department represented in this playbook where information is organized, and again, has information that fall along the empathy and resilience, nature and well-being, and hope and collective action. I know, I'm just going to speed through that. So you can go through the next couple slides, Amanda. And now, Amanda, we can let you talk a bit about the Toolkit website. It's a lot of information to get through.
Thank you, Andy. Yep, I'm gonna speed through this really fast, and I do see two questions in the Q&A, and I want to just address them really quickly. We are hoping to provide some kind of way to share the Climate Action Playbook with visitors, and we're also hoping that museums are able to take those little chunks. As you can see, the slides that Andy was showing, like you can take a little piece and make an Instagram post or a poster or something in your museum and easily share it that way. But that's going to come later this year, hopefully. And then also the anonymous attendee submitted the staff and educator support. That's actually something that we heard at the ACM Interactivity Conference this year here in beautiful Madison. Thank you all for coming if you came. Was a question about how to support adults who are grieving as well, because climate change is really scary. And I can only imagine what it's like to be a parent and to hand off a world that's not the world that you grew up in. And it's also really scary, and to watch your child go through that. So that's definitely something that we're considering adding. So thank you for that question. Okay, I'm gonna peel through this. So we're excited to announce the launch of our Toolkit website later this year. In addition to the Climate Action Playbook and supporting promising practices, the Toolkit website will also include general project information, as well as additional resources to start your green journey and connections to other similar projects. There's other people on the call today that are actually part of those parallel projects, and we're excited to work with them and make those connections to hopefully make the website a one-stop shop. So you can hear about those other things and access those resources as well. We hope that this toolkit will grow and change as we move through the upcoming phases of this project, including what we learned in phase 2, as Joe Cox mentioned earlier. Our NEH Climate Smart grant funded cohort project, where 6 of the original museums will be working through with the Emeritus group to establish carbon emissions baselines, which is a question that someone else had previously, and to work to lower them. Be sure to join our email list for updates. So the connection between the Climate Action Playbook and the website, just to be clear for everyone, the toolkit is designed to support the developmental framework of the Climate Action Playbook. It gives examples of programs and other things, as well as more operational tidbits and project information. We're hoping that this will be a hub of information for anyone who's interested in sustainability, climate action, and early learning. So, promising practices is the majority of the website. Caretakers and Water Project partners have written over 40 promising practices on topics that range from investment policies, which we talked about earlier, to green events. Rather than being best practices, those short outlines of current practices and future goals focus on the ongoing and ever-changing nature of sustainability work. We chose the title very carefully and intentionally. While we're all experts in what our museums do every day, no one knows everything, right? So this is our way of sharing what we do know. We are hoping to build a community of learning, and therefore want to remove any barriers to anyone that might have or hesitancy when they're taking their leap into the green journey. Topics that support the Climate Action Playbook with specific examples and real life experiences of our museum partners. Over the last 2 years, this has been the most rich part of the project, and it's been such an honor to watch all of us learn together. And this is really an expression of all the things that we've learned together and all the things that we've learned that we're experts on. So we have 6 categories. You can see them all here: leadership and development, exhibits, facilities and buildings and grounds, operations and guest services, marketing and communications, and education programs and events. They really parallel with those sections that Andy was talking about earlier. These are some examples of the topics that we've written things on. And also, this is a photograph of my favorite coworker. His name is Sad Yeti. He's sad about climate change, but he comes outside in the winter. The authors of these things have been, or these topics have been really open and honest. Our goal in these practices was to not only share the rich and real life experiences of the work being done across the country, but also to share our mistakes and missteps. Like Sarah Sutton said yesterday, we are all doing the work. Our promising practices provide rich resources and a variety of solutions from a wide range of museums. Here you'll see a summary of a mindfulness program that was written by I wrote her new title out, she got a new title. Research and Family Learning Manager Heather Davis. She wrote a promising practice on mindfulness programs for toddlers. So you can see here the depth of Heather's knowledge. And then she also provided lesson plans for these programs that she does here in the museum every day. This is a really good example of the work that's being done in all of our museums, and it's things that we hope can apply to every kind of museum of every size. Again, the authors are everybody who's on the project. Thank you to everyone who wrote them. And I think it's really interesting that they all start with where that practice was, where they are, and where they want to go in the future.
Awesome. At this point, I'm hoping we could get into our conversation. And if you can spotlight us
Do you want me to take
panelists.
down the slides?
Yes, you can take down the slides. Also, at this point, reminder, if you have any questions, please submit those into the Q&A. We'll hopefully have time for some of those. But I wanted to begin by first letting the panelists introduce themselves and describe the relationship between their professional role and the Climate Action Playbook and the Toolkit website. As folks have been part of this project on the panel the entire time, the playbook and website have different, I think, relationships to each of you. So Natalie, if you don't mind starting.
Thanks, Andy. I'm happy to jump in. Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Bortoli. I'm the Vice President of Programming and Experience Development here at Chicago Children's Museum. My role is I am a proud member of the Caretakers of Wonder cohort of museums. I was a person who provided some review of the Climate Action Playbook, and I am a user of the Climate Action Playbook. So my role within the museum, I am particularly interested in the resources that are coming through in the educational programming section for practitioners, as well as the resources for parents and caregivers. Part of my role here at the museum as part of our senior leadership team is also I, along with colleagues, are responsible for developing policies and our, philosophical foundation here at the museum. So absolutely, these resources are something that are helping us to determine, long-term strategies, values, and goals for our museum to last into the future. On that note, one of the promising practices briefs that I was able to contribute to this process is about our process for creating institutional position papers and how that will help us develop our sustainability position paper. And then I, along with Katie Silvovsky, who many of you heard from yesterday, developed a promising practices piece on how we can, within an indoor space, create programs, activities that really are pro-climate, develop pro-climate behaviors in children. So I'm really grateful to be part of this initiative and looking forward to the conversation here today and beyond.
Thank you. Nadia, if you don't mind introducing yourself quick.
Sure, Andy. Yeah, thank you. I'm honored to be part of this group. So I'm Nadia Niggli. I'm here at Madison Children's Museum. I'm the Director of Design and Exhibit Development. So I helped oversee the design direction of the Climate Action Playbook and the ongoing work on the Toolkit website. And I helped write one of the promising practices on outdoor exhibits.
Excellent. Peter.
Hello, everybody. I'm Peter Williams. I'm the Vice President of Exhibits and Building Operations at Chicago Children's Museum. So, yeah, I've been part of this project from the beginning here with the Caretakers of Wonder. Reviewed the playbook and a number of the promising practices, and very excited for this to come to its final form that we can really dig in and start using it. But yeah, I mean, in my role, I lead the effort of design and fabrication and exhibits and also the building operations. So there's a lot of opportunity for me to, and have through the years, to affect how we present ourselves and physically in the world, and just really excited by this book, and reinforcing that in the use of natural materials and how important that is, and that using synthetic materials, no matter what they look like, doesn't really contribute to good quality nature play for children.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. Amanda and David, for the sake of time, I'm wondering if there's anything you want to add in an introduction or background, or if we can jump into some questions.
Jump into questions, Andy.
Great. Okay. I did want to have my first question for Natalie. So these resources are intended to support both organizations and visitors, the families, caregivers, and young children coming to the museums, right? And you speak to the significance you see the Climate Action Playbook and/or the toolkit of promising practices has on your work, and more broadly, the concerns that you find these resources address.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. That is what I'm really excited about, is sort of this dual purpose of the Climate Action Playbook being both for practitioners as well as for visitors. And I think, I'll comment on the visitor piece first and briefly. I think, as probably folks have seen as you showed the examples, those pages I see as being almost, ready to go resources that we can share with our visiting audiences. And in fact, that's something we're planning to do here at Chicago Children's Museum, is making those parent caregiver tips available. We've particularly targeted our early childhood play space, where we really can have one-on-one interactions with visitors, adults in our space, and be able to share those resources. I also think, as Amanda referenced, there's just such rich content and a volume of content there that museums can be strategic about plucking pieces out that they want, or using certain parts of it to present that in a more digestible way, whether that's to populate a series of social media posts, or to use some of that content in signage in our museums. So lots of rich resource, and I think a vast potential of ways to use it. For the practitioner resources, again, there's so much here. And I think that organization, as you've described, by age band, by operational area of the museum, really makes it very usable for us as museums. One way that I'm planning to use it, I appreciate so much yesterday, Sarah Sutton told us to remember to start where we are, and that this can be embedded in the work that we are already doing versus being seen as an add-on. So, something I'm planning is to use the Climate Action Playbook as part of our regular team, educational programming meetings, to look at where we are, take stock of where we stand. What are we already doing well? What could we be pushing ourselves more to do better? And what are some longer term goals we can make just through our lens of, developing and delivering facilitated programming, and how we use consumable materials, and all of those things very much related to our particular work in the museum. I'll say quickly, one, I guess, challenge or concern that I feel these resources do address is that we are an example of a museum that has no outdoor space. And so I think, that's an important perspective that we've brought to the process. I feel that it has been reflected. As I mentioned, we have a promising practices piece on this. But I think when we think about equity too, this is something that families face. There are many families in our communities who don't feel that they necessarily have a readily accessible outdoor space where they feel safe. So I think that's an important concern. It's something that we will need to continue to consider further. But I'm proud to say here at CCM, we have some great examples of how we have indoors been able to create activities that I think are replicable by families too, for engaging children in pro-climate behaviors by interacting with hands-on with natural materials, working together so they experience that power of collective action, building empathy by taking on roles of other living things in our environment, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I'm excited about the continued support that these resources are going to provide in our practice.
Excellent. Thank you, Natalie. And I will quickly address the Q&A question and it was clarified around supporting staff. And I will say, yes, there are tangible resources in here. People have been thinking about how the actual staff needs to be addressed in this. And part of it, right down to like being able to have an hourly reminder of taking a moment to do some deep breathing across the whole museum is something, for example, that's in here. But this goes into another question I had, which is around the fact that these resources are for virtually every department of a museum. I'm asking Nadia if you could talk about the significance of being part of an initiative that takes on these different dimensions of a museum, from the materials, the operations, marketing, to education, exhibits, and facilities. There, you asked how you think about that all.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really key. I think we found that to meaningfully implement any of these climate initiatives, it really has to be infused into everyone's work in our museum. It can't just be leadership or facilities or operations. It would just be kind of surface level then. So we need that buy-in that Neil Gordon was mentioning earlier, that kind of ownership and momentum that each department can give to the project. So it's really important it's cross-departmental. And the playbook was really designed with that ownership in mind. The whole second part of it is for museum professionals. And it's structured so that you can jump to a section that's relevant to your own work, maybe that week or that for that department, and then find what's relevant for you. So it's a big document, like we've said. So that's a really useful feature of it. Same for the toolkit that we're excited to be rolling out soon. It'll be structured so that it's filterable and searchable in that sense that you can find what you need for your department so that everyone can find something. And same for promising practices. If you read through the titles that we've developed, there's a broad array of topics that are addressed. And so that's really, really key. And I think we keep hearing this, just start where you are. And I think that the playbook, the promising practices, the toolkit, these are places you can go, resources, you can just find that first idea, or maybe it's your 10th idea if you're looking for an infusion of new ideas. So I'm really excited when those will come out. The last thing I'll just mention is here at Madison, we've found it really useful to have a green team that serves as a kind of a hub for generating ideas and then also tracking progress for the project. And it's just really key for that buy-in across a diagonal swath of the staff.
Awesome. Thank you, Nadia. And yeah, I'll add in my thinking about the robustness and volume of that museum professional section speaks to this work as being cultural organizational change. I think everyone is thinking, this isn't one thing that you can check off a list this year. It is about making change for really the future. And so all of these resources are designed to be practices that will hopefully kind of change the actual culture of your organization to be more sustainable. But I hope we have time for at least one more question. And Peter, this will be for you. In understanding that these resources were designed that for each museum that is unique, that there's no one size fits all prescription, what are the challenges and opportunities you encounter when considering these resources to achieve your and your organization's goals?
Yes, thank you, Andy. Yes, certainly. I mean, as Natalie mentioned, Chicago Children's Museum, we're part of we're tenants of a much larger facility with a landlord who owns really all the outdoor space. And we have indoor space, but there's lots of great tips and ideas in the playbook. And we've had discussions going forward already for how we can integrate nature play in our indoor spaces. And then I think we're also pretty inspired to make use of a 1,500 square foot terrace space. You don't really get your hands in the dirt there. It's not on the ground. It's 60 feet up, but it hasn't been fully developed as a space for our museum. And I think we're pretty inspired to see what we could do in regards to nature play in a space like that. So that's some of our challenges is just, not having outdoor space. How do we make it authentic and real here? And I think there's a lot of great tips and ideas in the playbook and in the promising practices.
Thank you. I know we're running low on time. If you want to put up, there is a couple of reflection questions. But also this last question was around what techniques of interactive exhibit design do you think can be used to engage adults in the process beyond giving them text with tips, suggestions for behaviors, knowledge, etc. And how can exhibit and environment design support adults' roles in children's navigation of climate change and related issues? Great, well articulated question. Anyone want to address that quickly?
I'll just say that's a really huge, big question. But my advice would be just to try something, like be open to trying new materials, trying a new mindset and a new approach to exhibit design so that you're willing to maybe fail and then assess and recalibrate. Evaluation is really key also for learning from past mistakes so that we can try and then learn from those mistakes.
I'm going to piggyback off of what Nadia said and also say to keep in mind how adults use the space. More seating is always good if you want adults to hang out there and interacting at different levels so that different people of different heights and in mobility devices can all interact together.
Excellent.
We're at time now.
Thank you all. Thank you, panelists. And just a reminder that these resources will be launching this fall. Caretakersofwonder.org. Keep an eye out.